Imagine two individuals attempting to move a massive boulder up a steep incline. The first positions himself behind the weight and pushes with raw force, muscles strained, energy draining, advancing it inches at a time. The second places a rigid beam beneath the stone, calculates the fulcrum, applies measured pressure, and elevates the same mass with minimal exertion. Both sought identical outcomes. Both acted. Only one understood structural advantage. The difference was not strength, willpower, or moral superiority. It was positioning. One relied on effort, the other applied leverage. That distinction governs financial trajectories today. Most professionals exhaust themselves applying force to systems designed to resist them, while a minority quietly studies structure and redirects force through it. This channel does not analyze motivation, it analyzes structure. Across corporate America and global markets, compensation does not flow toward visible strain. It flows toward structural control. Many were conditioned to believe that consistent effort inside established systems guarantees advancement. Yet compensation data, equity distribution, and ownership structures reveal a different equation. The S&P 500 is not built on the labor of those trading hours for wages. It is built on the equity held by those who structured the platform. Wall Street does not reward exhaustion. It rewards leverage embedded in contracts, ownership, and scalable systems. The majority continue applying force where force is capped by time. A smaller minority designs fulcrums where effort multiplies. That separation, not intelligence or virtue, defines financial divergence in modern economies. Most people internalize the wrong variable. When outcomes stall, they increase input. More hours, more credentials, more visible productivity. The assumption remains linear. Greater effort must produce proportionally greater results. But linear effort contains a ceiling. There are 24 hours in a day. Energy decays. Attention fragments. When the individual stops, output stops. This is the structural flaw embedded in time-for-money models, promoted through traditional employment pathways. The Federal Reserve can expand monetary supply. Corporations can scale revenue through technology. But an individual exchanging labor cannot scale beyond biological limits. The issue is not insufficient discipline, it is structural confinement. Without leverage, the system converts human energy into incremental returns while reserving exponential returns for those positioned above the mechanism itself. Consider the agricultural laborer who works through volatile seasons, exposed to weather risk, commodity fluctuations, and rising input costs. His effort is undeniable, yet ownership of the land, distribution contracts, and financing structures determine profit allocation long before harvest begins. Or observe hospital staff delivering direct patient care, while administrative ownership and private equity groups capture long-term financial appreciation. The pattern repeats in logistics, technology platforms, and media distribution. Operational labor absorbs variability. Structural ownership captures surplus. This is not moral commentary, it is mechanical design. Systems allocate reward according to position within hierarchy, not according to sweat expenditure. Those who understand leverage seek proximity to control points, equity, intellectual property, scalable distribution, contractual advantage. Those who do not remain beneath the weight. Education reinforces this orientation early. Students are trained to comply with schedules, complete assignments, and exchange time for evaluation. Performance metrics reward consistency within predefined parameters rather than system design. The implicit lesson is transactional. Input hours receive grades. Input years receive credentials. Input labor receive wages. Rarely are students taught to analyze ownership models, capital allocation or scalable distribution mechanisms. The curriculum optimizes individuals for participation inside existing hierarchies, not for constructing new ones. As a result, many graduates enter corporate structures prepared to perform, but unprepared to position. They understand tasks. They do not understand leverage. This distinction explains why promotions plateau, while equity holders compound wealth through instruments most employees never examine. If you want clarity over financial noise, subscribe. This channel builds architecture, not encouragement. Leverage is not an abstraction. It is a structural multiplier. In financial markets, leverage appears as capital deployed through debt instruments or equity stakes that amplify returns relative to initial input. In technology, it manifests as code that scales across millions of users without proportional labor increases. In media, it is distribution infrastructure that broadcasts a single message to global audiences instantly. In organizational design, it is delegation systems that convert one decision into thousands of coordinated actions. Across these domains, the principle remains constant. A properly positioned mechanism expands output beyond direct effort. Those who understand this do not chase additional hours. They analyze where control points reside and redirect energy towards securing access to them. Linear effort follows arithmetic growth. 1 unit of input yields 1 unit of output. 10 units yield 10. The trajectory is stable but capped. Exponential leverage follows a power function. A single strategic input placed within the right architecture produces compounding returns that outpace linear contribution. Venture capital illustrates this clearly. A portfolio structured around scalable ventures may absorb multiple failures, yet generate disproportionate gains from one breakout success. The same mathematics governs intellectual property, software platforms, and network effects. Once the structure is established, marginal cost declines while reach expands. The operator's presence becomes optional to continued growth. This is the distinction most professionals overlook while optimizing productivity instead of positioning. History repeatedly demonstrates that influence scales through structure rather than stamina. Philosophers who shaped civilizations did not rely on endless lectures. They relied on systems that preserved and transmitted ideas beyond their lifetimes. The Renaissance offers a clear case study. Leonardo da Vinci did not attempt to outwork every artisan in Florence. He aligned himself with patrons, workshops, and commissions that extended his reach beyond solitary labor. His notebooks, designs, and engineered concepts functioned as intellectual leverage, multiplying the value of each concentrated effort. The lesson is not artistic admiration, it is structural positioning. When effort is embedded within institutions, distribution networks, or patronage systems, its impact expands. When effort remains isolated, it dissipates upon completion. Modern platform economics follows the same architecture. A software engineer writing code once can deploy it across millions of devices simultaneously. A founder structuring equity retains upside from every incremental user added to the system. Meanwhile, individuals operating within that platform exchange time for fixed compensation, regardless of overall scale achieved. This divergence is not accidental, it is contractual. Ownership clauses, stock options, revenue participation agreements, and licensing terms determine who captures expansion. Those details are rarely emphasized in motivational narratives about perseverance, yet they dictate financial outcomes far more reliably than effort alone. The structural question is always identical. Who controls the mechanism through which value flows, and who merely participates inside it? 3 cognitive distortions obscure this reality. The first is survivorship bias. Public narratives highlight relentless work while minimizing structural advantage, timing, and network positioning. The second is effort justification. Individuals attach moral value to exhaustion, assuming greater strain must equate to greater worth. The third is cultural visibility bias. Society praises visible labor while overlooking invisible architecture. These distortions reinforce linear thinking and discourage structural analysis. When a startup founder discusses sleepless nights, audiences focus on sacrifice rather than capitalization tables or distribution leverage. When a hedge fund manager references discipline, few examine capital access or risk asymmetry. The result is predictable. People optimize effort while ignoring leverage, then question why outcomes diverge. Financial intelligence without emotional control becomes volatile. Access to leverage amplifies not only returns, but also error. Capital deployed without risk management magnifies losses. Media influence exercised without discipline erodes credibility. Delegated authority without oversight fractures organizations. The same multiplier that expands output can accelerate collapse if misapplied. This is why structural positioning must precede emotional calibration. Markets reward asymmetry but punish instability. Those seeking leverage must first detach identity from immediate outcomes. Emotional attachment to short-term fluctuations leads to reactive decisions that undermine compounding systems. True leverage requires restraint, measured deployment, and clarity about downside exposure. Without control, amplification becomes liability rather than advantage. Scarcity conditioning further complicates structural thinking. Individuals raised in environments where income was unstable often equate security with guaranteed wages. The predictability of a paycheck feels safer than the uncertainty of ownership, even if long-term upside is limited. This conditioning shapes risk tolerance and career decisions more than most realize. A salaried position offers immediate clarity. Equity participation offers deferred potential tied to performance and market conditions. Without recalibration, the mind defaults toward short-term certainty. Yet wealth concentration consistently correlates with asset ownership rather than fixed compensation. Understanding this requires confronting internal narratives about risk, stability, and control. Structural leverage demands tolerance for variability in exchange for disproportionate gain. Debt architecture illustrates leverage's dual nature. Properly structured debt can amplify returns by allowing control of assets beyond initial capital. Corporate finance uses this mechanism routinely. Real estate investors employ it to control appreciating property with limited upfront equity. However, consumer debt reverses the equation. High-interest liabilities attached to depreciating assets convert future income into past consumption. The mechanism remains leverage, but direction changes. Instead of amplifying assets, it magnifies obligation. This distinction is rarely emphasized in public discourse, where all debt is either demonized or glorified without structural nuance. The decisive variable is alignment. Does the leverage increase productive capacity, or does it extract future effort to service declining value? Identity attachment represents another structural barrier. Many professionals equate self-worth with visible busyness. Calendars filled with meetings and extended work hours create a perception of importance. Yet, busyness and leverage rarely coincide. Systems thinking often requires fewer actions, not more. Designing a scalable process may eliminate repetitive tasks entirely. Delegation can reduce direct involvement while increasing total output. To the uncalibrated observer, this appears like reduced effort. In reality, it is repositioned effort. The ego resists this shift because it diminishes visible struggle. However, markets reward outcome, not theatrics. Detaching identity from constant motion is prerequisite to constructing mechanisms that operate independently of personal exertion. Measurement discipline determines whether leverage compounds or decays. Without metrics tied to cash flow, asset appreciation, user growth, or intellectual property value, systems drift. Corporations track earnings per share, return on equity, and operating margins because leverage must be monitored. Individuals rarely apply equivalent rigor to their own positioning. They track hours worked, but not equity accumulated. They monitor salary increases but ignore asset allocation. Structural awareness requires quantifying leverage exposure. What percentage of income derives from scalable assets? What portion depends on direct labor? These questions reveal trajectory. Absent measurement, effort defaults back to linear patterns, and the architecture of compounding remains theoretical rather than operational. Volatility memory shapes future positioning. Individuals who experience financial downturns early often retreat towards stability afterward, avoiding structures perceived as uncertain. Yet volatility is not inherently destructive. Which side of volatility are you structurally positioned on? Equity portfolios fluctuate daily, but long-term appreciation reflects compounded leverage across productive enterprises. Avoiding volatility entirely often means avoiding leverage altogether. The structural objective is not elimination of risk, but intelligent distribution of it. Diversification, liquidity buffers, and asymmetric bets create controlled exposure rather than blind hazard. Those who understand this treat volatility as data, not threat. Those who do not interpret fluctuation as failure and revert to linear safety. Network positioning represents another layer of leverage, often underestimated. Access to capital, partnerships, and opportunity flows through relational architecture. Venture ecosystems, private equity circles, and executive networks operate through trust and repeated interaction. Entry into these systems alters trajectory without increasing raw effort. The same individual performing identical work inside a different network often experiences exponential divergence in outcome. This is not mysticism, it is distribution. Information, funding, and endorsement compound within connected clusters. Isolation constrains leverage regardless of competence. Strategic visibility within high-value networks increases access to asymmetric opportunities. Position determines probability long before performance is evaluated. If this level of structural clarity resonates with you, leave a comment below something that captures your attention. Control of distribution channels further defines leverage. Owning intellectual property without distribution limits scale. Possessing skill without audience restricts return. Media platforms, licensing agreements, and syndication structures transform localized effort into global reach. In financial markets, exchange listings provide liquidity and valuation expansion unavailable in private isolation. Distribution multiplies impact by reducing friction between creation and consumption. Those who design channels capture optionality. Those who depend on external gatekeepers surrender it. This principle extends beyond media into manufacturing, logistics, and digital infrastructure. Control points sit where value transitions from production to market. Securing access to that transition determines whether leverage compounds internally or is surrendered externally. At this stage, the structural divide becomes visible. One path prioritizes effort within predefined boundaries. The other prioritizes positioning within scalable architectures. The difference is subtle at first, but widens over time. Da Vinci understood patronage not as dependence, but as leverage. Alignment with powerful sponsors allowed concentration on creation, while distribution and protection were externally reinforced. His output endured because it was embedded within structures that preserved and amplified it. The principle applies today across venture capital, intellectual property law, and platform economics. Isolation limits reach. Embedded positioning expands it. The question is no longer whether you are working hard. It is where your work sits within the hierarchy of control. Hierarchy determines reward allocation long before effort is measured. In corporate structures, equity holders sit above salaried employees in capital distribution. In financial markets, asset owners precede creditors in claim priority. In digital ecosystems, platform architects capture value before content contributors. These layers are codified through contracts, not emotion. Understanding hierarchy clarifies why two individuals contributing comparable energy experience radically different outcomes. Position within structure precedes productivity within role. Those who occupy upper tiers benefit from downstream activity without proportional labor. Those positioned lower absorb variability without proportional upside. Structural awareness begins with mapping hierarchy and identifying where leverage concentrates. The behavioral wealth divide emerges at this intersection of hierarchy and perception. Some individuals interpret systems as fixed environments within which they must perform. Others interpret systems as constructs that can be entered, modified, or owned. This cognitive distinction precedes financial divergence. Viewing employment as the endpoint constrains leverage exploration. Viewing it as temporary positioning within broader capital strategy expands options. Exposure to markets, equity participation, and entrepreneurial risk reframes career decisions. The divide is not intelligence-based, it is architectural awareness. Those who perceive structures seek to influence them. Those who do not remain optimized for participation alone. Recalibration begins with auditing leverage exposure. What assets generate income independent of direct labor? What contracts provide participation in growth rather than fixed compensation? What intellectual property exists that can be licensed, scaled, or distributed? These questions shift focus from productivity to positioning. The objective is not abandonment of effort, but redirection of it toward control points. Incremental adjustments compound. Equity acquired early in expanding ventures may appear insignificant initially, yet appreciate asymmetrically over time. Skill deployed into scalable mediums outpaces skill confined to hourly exchange. Structural shifts often begin quietly before becoming financially visible. Emotional detachment strengthens this transition. Markets fluctuate, ventures fail, assets underperform. Without composure, leverage strategies collapse under short-term pressure. The Federal Reserve adjusts rates, liquidity tightens, valuations compress, and sentiment oscillates. Reactivity erodes structure. Discipline preserves it. Those positioned for leverage anticipate cycles rather than panic within them. They maintain liquidity, diversify exposure, and evaluate long-term fundamentals over immediate noise. Emotional neutrality is not indifference. It is calibrated response to volatility. Leverage without discipline magnifies instability. Leverage with discipline compounds quietly through market cycles. Capital allocation becomes the practical expression of structural awareness. Income must transition from consumption toward asset acquisition. Public equities, private ventures, real estate holdings, and intellectual property represent different leverage vehicles, each with distinct risk profiles. Allocation decisions determine future optionality. Concentrating entirely on salary growth ignores compounding mechanisms embedded in ownership. Even modest, consistent acquisition of productive assets shifts trajectory over decades. Compounding is mechanical, not motivational. Returns reinvested expand base capital, which generates additional returns. The cycle accelerates without additional labor input. Those who prioritize allocation over lifestyle signaling construct silent leverage. Those who prioritize visible status often sacrifice long-term positioning for short-term validation. Time allocation mirrors capital allocation. Hours invested in scalable skill development differ from hours consumed by repetitive tasks. Learning capital markets, negotiation structures, intellectual property law, or systems design increases leverage capacity. These competencies alter future opportunity sets. Conversely, overinvestment in narrow operational roles limits upward mobility. The distinction is not about abandoning current responsibilities, it is about parallel positioning. Incremental skill shifts accumulate structural advantage. Professionals who study ownership models, revenue-sharing agreements, and platform economics interpret opportunities differently than those focused solely on performance reviews. Over time, that interpretive difference converts into financial divergence. Institutional awareness further enhances leverage. Pension funds, endowments, and sovereign wealth funds deploy capital through diversified portfolios designed for long-term asymmetry. They analyze risk, liquidity, and expected return systematically. Individuals rarely emulate this discipline, yet the principles are transferable. Diversification across asset classes reduces concentrated exposure. Strategic use of tax structures preserves compounding. Rebalancing maintains alignment with long-term objectives. These are not advanced secrets, they are structural habits. Institutions succeed not through constant activity, but through calibrated positioning sustained across cycles. Emulating that mindset shifts focus from immediate income to durable capital formation. Ultimately, leverage reflects control over process rather than intensity of effort. Control over distribution, ownership, capital, and networks determines compounding capacity. Da Vinci's legacy did not endure because he worked longer hours than his contemporaries. It endured because his work was preserved, commissioned, and circulated within systems that amplified it beyond his lifespan. Structure preserved output. Modern parallels exist in intellectual property frameworks, licensing agreements, and scalable digital platforms. The principle remains unchanged across centuries. Embed effort within enduring mechanisms, and its impact extends. Leave effort isolated, and it expires with you. At this point, the distinction should be precise. Effort is input. Leverage is architecture. Input without architecture decays. Architecture without input remains dormant. The objective is not to abandon work, but to reposition it within structures that outlive direct exertion. Professionals who remain focused exclusively on productivity metrics rarely evaluate contractual leverage, equity participation, or intellectual property rights. Yet those variables dictate long-term wealth accumulation. Financial statements reveal this consistently. Equity growth outpaces wage growth over extended periods. Asset appreciation surpasses linear income expansion. The arithmetic is public. The interpretation is not. Those who study balance sheets and ownership structures recognize patterns others overlook. The remaining barrier is psychological resistance to delayed gratification. Leverage strategies often require front-loaded effort with deferred reward. Building equity in a venture, developing intellectual property, or constructing distribution infrastructure may produce limited, immediate return. Linear compensation models provide instant feedback. Structural models demand patience. Markets reward those who tolerate latency between action and outcome. Compounding is indifferent to impatience. It accumulates quietly while attention drifts elsewhere. Individuals unwilling to endure initial ambiguity default back to predictable wages. The cycle repeats. Understanding leverage intellectually is insufficient. Committing to it behaviorally distinguishes trajectory. Da Vinci approached creation with deliberate patience. He studied anatomy, engineering, optics, and geometry, not for immediate applause but for integrated mastery. His notebooks reveal systematic inquiry rather than frantic output. That intellectual leverage allowed each completed work to carry disproportionate depth. The same principle applies within capital markets and enterprise design. Integrated understanding compounds effectiveness. Fragmented effort dissipates it. Professionals who cultivate cross-disciplinary awareness identify leverage points invisible to narrowly trained peers. Breadth, when structured, enhances depth. The objective is not scattered curiosity, but interconnected insight that informs strategic positioning. Reorientation begins with one question. Where does your effort accumulate when you are absent? If income halts immediately when work stops, leverage remains minimal. If assets, equity, or systems continue generating value, architecture exists. This diagnostic requires honesty rather than optimism. Many overestimate passive structures that are in reality dependent on constant oversight. True leverage reduces dependence on personal presence over time. It may not eliminate involvement entirely, but it shifts the balance. Evaluating this ratio clarifies next moves. Increase ownership, secure distribution, acquire scalable assets. Reduce reliance on linear exchange. Incremental adjustments alter long-term slope. Structure requires maintenance. Insight without implementation decays. Clarity without measurement collapses under volatility. The framework I use personally is built to audit leverage exposure, capital allocation, and structural positioning with precision. No urgency, no hype, just architecture. The link is below. Use it only if you are ready to measure what you currently avoid quantifying. Systems reveal truth faster than emotion ever will. Before concluding, answer this privately. Are you positioned inside leverage or beneath it? Money does not reward effort. Money reveals structure. Across markets, industries, and centuries, the pattern remains consistent. Those positioned within leverage capture disproportionate returns. Those confined to linear contribution encounter ceilings. This is not condemnation of work. It is clarification of architecture. Da Vinci's enduring influence illustrates the principle in artistic form. Effort embedded in systems multiplies across generations. Effort isolated to momentary labor fades with time. The decision is structural, not emotional. You do not earn wealth through strain alone. You expose your architecture through positioning. And architecture, once correctly aligned, compounds beyond the limits of individual exertion. And there you have it. Leverage that decides who builds wealth. This breakdown sharpened your thinking. Continue with the next video. It will take you further. Support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Stay sharp, stay intentional. Keep crafting your wealth the way Da Vinci crafted his work, one deliberate stroke at a time. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next video.